Good morning,
Good
good
morning.
afternoon, and good day wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to another edition of Sales TV Live. Today we're asking, want to sell more? Become a customer anthropologist. I'm joined by Ashley Welch, co-founder of Somersault Innovation. With her extensive experience working with high-tech sales teams from companies like Microsoft and Salesforce, Ashley brings a wealth of knowledge on leveraging design thinking to build deeper client relationships and accelerate revenue growth. Ashley, welcome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Ashley, let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and what led you to where you are today.
Sure. So I have a background in sales. I've been in sales for over 30 years. I started at a consulting firm, and during that time, I was there for 20 years selling. And during that time, I learned about design thinking, which is an innovation methodology. And although I was selling the methodology as a process that people could learn to do in their companies, I also was delivering it to groups of people and fell in love with this methodology. I always say design thinking is a process that's fun, it's energizing, it's collaborative, and it reduces your risk of failure and increases your rate of success because it gets you close to the customer. So fell in love with the methodology, left the company I was working at with a co-founder and said, let's start our own company so that we can just focus on teaching people these skills of design thinking. And then quickly realized that these skills really could tremendously transform how sellers sold. So that's a different type of application of design thinking in the sales environment. And so that's what we pioneered, bringing these tools, basically curating the best tools to enhance a seller's ability to move through the deal cycle faster for a greater opportunity with their customers. So that was the birth of Somersault Innovation almost 10 years ago now. And we started working at Salesforce. And I think because of that, we've stayed in the high-tech space mostly, working with go-to-market teams, account executives, and sort of various roles within the go-to-market community.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So I want to jump right into the topic for today. What does it mean to be a customer anthropologist?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Well, I think of anthropologists as super engaged in understanding with all sorts of interesting tools and techniques the person they're studying. And so in sales, we need to be really curious about our customer and understanding everything about them and their customers. And so I've coined that term in order to help sellers really orient themselves to the degree to which it would benefit them to really understand their customer and their customer's customer. And because of the world of design, who are experts at discovery, there are all sorts of tools and techniques you can use to actually get more interesting information about your customer and their customer. So customer anthropologist is basically saying who you should embody as a seller in your discovery phase with your customer.
Okay. So you brought up design thinking principles and sales. How can design thinking principles be applied to sales? Tell us a little more about that, if you would, please.
Yeah. So as I just mentioned, design thinkers are experts at discovery. They're experts at co-creation. They're experts at curiosity and empathy, at insight generation. So all of those things are things that we as sellers need to do well as well. So what we've done is say, well, let's look at this body of work in the design thinking world. How do we really simplify and make some really easy tools that sellers can use? So I'll give you an example. So the notion of, let's say your customer's customer. This is something that a lot of people really like and tune into because it's a little different. So most of us really focus on our customer. But if you can focus also on your customer's customer, and let's use an example. So let's say my customer is Target. Their customers are all of us, right? And there are all sorts of types of us, right? There's families, there's young people, there's older people, millennials, etc. So if you think about Target's customer, how can you as a seller really understand what your customers care about. And you can start to do that first by just creating a map visually of who's your customer, and then who are all the different customer sets they serve. And it could be businesses too. And then start to think about which would be an interesting customer set to get a little bit more information about, because it connects with what my customer cares about. So let's say, I'm making this up, let's say Target is really trying to go after the new mother population. If I, as a seller to Target, am able to do some good discovery about new mothers and learn about what they care about right now at this time in the world, and serve that information up to Target, that's interesting to them, right? That causes them to lean in and say, well, wow, tell me more about that, because that's something I'm interested in. So you're paying attention to where value is derived for your customer. And if you can learn just a few interesting insights about that customer set, it changes the conversation with your customer, because all of a sudden now you're consultative. You're bringing something to them that's interesting to them versus talking about your product.
I love it. Talking to them about the things that they care about instead of talking to them about the things that I care about.
Exactly. Which sounds easy, right? But I think in sales, the other thing I'm fond of saying, or I think about, is like the pressure of sales and the promise of pay really obliterates our ability to stay customer centric, to stay curious and empathic, because we are sort of being told we need to close. That's how we're going to make our money. And that's what our company, our executives, and if we're public, our shareholders are looking for.
Ironic, the more we push towards that, the further it goes.
Totally ironic, right? And if you can relax into, let me just stay curious and open, you create better connections, people share more, and of course, more is likely to transpire from that vantage point.
So you've mentioned co-creative. I'm a seller.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This is the stuff that I have to sell. What do you mean by co-creative? What are the key behaviors of a co-creative seller?
Yeah. Okay. Well, and I think also a good question is like, why even co-create? So let me start with the why. So I'm wondering, I have a question for you. Have you ever washed a rental car?
No, I have not.
Why not?
Because it's not my car. It's not my job. I expect they do that.
Exactly. So when you're not invested, you don't take a lot of ownership. No one washes their rental car. So it's the same idea with anything. The more our fingerprints are on something, the more we have ownership, the more likely we are to want it. And so as a seller, the notion is, how can I co-create with my customer in small ways or big ways? So the smallest way I think of is just if I had a meeting with a customer and I have an agenda, I might say, hey, this is what I'd like to cover during this meeting. What would you like to cover? Right? And get your input into how we're going to spend our time together. That's a co-creative move. It's a mindset that translates into small behaviors. Another move would be, you've asked me for a proposal on something. I put it in a Word document form or Google Doc where you can actually edit it. And I send it to you and say, this is just a draft based on our conversation. I'd love to get your input. If you could just, make edits, or I'm going to share it with you. And as we go, I'm going to make edits as we go visually. So you can see basically how your thought process is embedded in what I'm offering. So I think, first of all, as a seller, to think about, how can I co-create with my customer? How can I get their fingerprints on it? Is transformative in and of itself. That mindset is going to cause you to do different things. And then there are all these different tools and techniques for doing this. I told you, we work mostly in tech. These big tech firms really understand this. They understand that if we can co-create with our most strategic accounts, we are going to drive much larger deals and partnerships. So they have what I like to call like the Navy SEALs of design thinking, these small teams internally who only work on the premier, marquee, most strategic accounts, and they will take them through anything from a day to a month, several months to a year-long process with their customer of co-creation. So let's say an envisioning workshop. So let's get in a room together and let's talk about like the art of the possible. What could we do together? As you can imagine, once they start to see their ideas on the board, if you can draw them even better, they start to be much more invested. So I'm actually just writing an article on co-creation. There's so many things that people are doing in this space that are really interesting, but it's still very, I'd say, novel and not used very much. So I think this is a really smart space for go-to-market teams to pay attention to.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Some of the things that you were talking about, like getting their input on the agenda.
Yeah.
I've heard some top salespeople talk about that, but I don't know that they talked about it in the context of co-creation.
Yeah.
So they know that it works just inherently,
Yeah.
but they don't know why. So when
Yeah.
they go and tell their peers, this is what works, well, I don't understand why, and I'm not going to emulate it. But in that framework, that's just one of many things that you can do to get people to buy in. Because when it's no longer my rental car,
Yeah.
when it's my car,
Yeah.
you're damn right I'm going to
Yeah.
wash it, and
Yeah.
I'm going to change the oil, and I'm going
Yeah.
to do all of the other maintenance with it. And lo and behold, I'm going to see it through.
Yes.
Whereas in a sales process, if it's not about me at all, I'm opting out.
Exactly. And I think there's another piece of this, which is the authenticity of this. I mean, when I talk about being a customer anthropologist or being curious or being co-creative, it has to come from an authentic place. Otherwise, it's just manipulative. And so that is as you say, people might pull people, ask their customer for input on the agenda. Could be just a manipulative move because they know it works, and that will come through. So authenticity is important as well.
Oh, absolutely. So how can empathy lead to faster deal cycles and increased sales opportunities?
Yeah. So empathy, as we're wired for empathy. I don't know if you've ever, there's a great video that has a mom with their baby. And in the video, it was done by a doctor. It was done years ago, like in the 70s. You can find it online. So mom's with her baby, and the baby's sitting in front of her, and the mom is engaged with the baby and cooing at the baby, and the baby's all happy and reactive. And then the mom is told to just turn away. So the mom literally turns like this and gives nothing to the baby. And the baby starts to sort of reach out and starts to gurgle a little bit and make these moves or sounds to be like, hey, pay attention to me. Finally, the baby gets so distressed that the baby starts arching out of their seat until the mother finally turns around and says, oh, I'm back. And so you can see how we are wired for this empathic connection. And when we don't receive it, what happens to us? Of course, we've developed all sorts of coping mechanisms as adults to figure our way through if we don't have an empathic person on the other side of us. But because we're wired for this, both to give it and to get it, the more empathic you can be, this is an obvious point with anybody in your life, not just sales, the more people are willing to trust you and lean in and give you information. And so what does empathy mean and look like? I think a lot of people think well, empathy just means I'm paying attention to you or I care about you, Rob. But you can demonstrate your empathy by paraphrasing what you hear. So it sounds like you feel really frustrated. And then sort of saying, did I get that right? Is there anything that I'm missing? That's an indication that I am paying attention. And literally in your brain, because we're wired for this, that causes connection. You get connected to me. So empathy in any stage in the deal cycle is so paramount for creating trust and getting great information that it behooves us to be empathic in sales.
Some people believe that empathy or EQ is a lot like IQ, intelligence. It's hardwired. How do you work on developing better empathy?
Yeah. Well, I think we can learn to be more empathic. I think you're right. Some of us may be born or nurtured in a way that we are naturally more empathic, or it's easier for us. But there are certainly ways. And I think about actually even there's different ways, just the way I said, that can cause you to learn oh, wait a second, if I slow down and I paraphrase and I check for understanding, did I get that right? Is there anything you'd add? That's just an empathic move. And so by teaching that as a series of behaviors or moves, people can learn to be more empathic. And I think then it becomes like a flywheel effect. Like you start leaning in, you tell me more. I'm like, oh, that worked, And I'd say to anyone, try this on a date. People just want to be listened to and loved, I think, at the end of the day. So the more you can try this out and practice these different techniques, I think the more effective you are at building that relationship. And actually, do you know Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference? So he talks and other things as well. And he was a hostage negotiator. So he talks about tactical empathy. Now, I don't love that term because it feels a little manipulative, which as a hostage negotiator, you're definitely trying to manipulate things so that you get your result. But he talks about basically being empathic as a tactical move in order to get people to engage with you and collaborate with you. So you can learn various techniques to be more empathic.
All right, I'm convinced. Design thinking is what my team needs.
What do I do?
Get started.
Yeah. Exactly. What do I do? What do I do? All right. Well, first of all, I'll plug my book, Naked Sales. So this is on Amazon, easy to get. If you send us, Rob or myself, your address, I'll even send you a copy. It's short. We wrote it as a one plane ride read, I like to say. It's easy. I'm a seller. You better make it easy and powerful and useful. So there are lots of tools and techniques in here that you can just start using yourself. Another thing is to reach out to us. We teach a program called Sell by Design, where we're teaching people these tools in relationship to a target account. And then we coach people to use them to grow their accounts. And I think if you're like, you want to geek out on design thinking, there are lots of online courses as well that you can take and, choose for yourself which tools and techniques you think are useful to help you.
What are some common challenges that sales teams face when trying to adopt this customer anthropologist mindset, this design thinking for sales?
Yeah. Well, I think design is really useful, or design thinking tools are really useful when it's complex, when there's complexity. If I'm selling you something that's sort of like a pen, do you write? Do you need this? I don't need to go into a lot of depth and really being a customer anthropologist and really understanding every single which way you might write. But the more complex the deal, the more this is relevant. So one of the things or challenges is people start to say, well, where do I become sort of a customer anthropologist or do deep discovery versus when do I just need to, keep my run rate business going? And if you call, I'm going to sell you what you want. So I think it's important to have a lens through which you're saying, how much do I need to understand about this customer? How much value is there here in actually doing a little deeper discovery than I would have? Because it does take some time. It doesn't take tons of time, but it takes a little more time. So that's one of the challenges, or I would say opportunities to just have that conversation with yourself or your manager. When do I want to go deeper versus I don't need to?
And besides revenue, how do you measure the effectiveness of design thinking approaches?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, it's around pipeline growth. So I think when you start to do this, we just see consistently pipeline growing. We just worked with a technology company, actually with their sales engineering population, and they added, what was it exactly? I think it was $18 million to pipeline in 2.5 months. We worked with Microsoft last year, 33 account executives, and they added $900,000 in unsighted revenue. Also, several $20+ million to pipeline. And then the other big thing we measure is number of decision makers that you get access to. So in their case, they got 143 new business decision maker contacts, many of which were outside of IT, which is what they were looking for. So pipeline, revenue, number of decision makers. Other people want to measure deal velocity or growth, cross-sell opportunities. All of those things sort of emerge, but I think pipeline is what you see first.
Okay. Give me a starting point.
Mm.
Help me with a simple exercise, something I can do as soon as we get off of this episode where I can start improving my own performance.
Okay. I'll give you maybe two. So one, we haven't talked very much about curiosity. So curiosity is another thing that you can learn, like empathy. Again, some of us more curious than others naturally, but even if you're not perhaps naturally that curious, you can get better. You can get more curious. And so what I would say is listen to four things in a conversation. Next time you have a conversation with your customer, listen to four things. Listen to if you hear any inconsistencies. If you do, that's a place to dig in. Say like, well, Rob, wait a minute, you said this, but now you're saying this. Tell me more about that. That's an inconsistency. Pay attention to what people value, which means like it's emotional for them. People make decisions based on emotion, and then they back it up with logic. So you want to understand emotion. So if Rob, you seem really frustrated, super happy, anxious, interested, whatever it might be, I might say like I'll lean in. That sounds like you really care about that, Rob. Tell me more about that. Or that sounds like a problem that's really bothering you. Tell me more about that. So what people value, hacks or workarounds, you've all of a sudden come up with your own technology to get around a system because whatever technology you have doesn't work. That's brilliant for a seller. Like, ooh, why did you create that? Tell me more about that. That's a hack. And then lastly, things that surprise you. So, oh, I didn't know you were going to do that. Or I don't understand that acronym. Or, wow, tell me more about that. If you hear a surprise, lean in. All of those are portals to more information. And you'll get more information that you can use. So those are curiosity tips. Another tip would be just immediately, next time you're on with a customer, ask them to tell you about their customer. You could say, tell me about your favorite customer. Why do they buy from you? What's the value to them of your services? Reorient the conversation to their customers.
In that context, are you seeking an exact customer or a customer persona?
Yeah, I'd say an exact customer because that just becomes more interesting. I mean, they're going to give you what they give you, but if I said to you, tell me about your favorite customer, you'd probably give me something real. And then that becomes more interesting to you. It's more interesting to me, and I can get information that becomes useful. And I think in all of this, especially in this discovery phase, you're not looking to just find the problem you can solve. That narrows what you're going to hear and what you're going to ask about. You want to open the aperture of what you learn because that's where more opportunity shows up. So forget about what you're selling for a little bit. Just focus on learning.
Forget about what you're selling and just focus on learning, aka listen. Yeah, that's really scary territory for most salespeople, isn't it?
Yes. And that's why I think a lot of people don't do it because I don't also know what you're going to say. So I think we also need to shed this idea of being the expert for a little bit. There's this, I think, of the myth of expertise, like you're more likely to engage with me or I'm more successful the more expert I seem. And I would say, actually, it's about being more curious is what actually draws you to me. We want to be connected first. From thousands of years ago, I need to know, like, are you going to hunt me down and kill me or not? I need to know, do we have a connection? First and foremost, next, I care about what, how smart you are.
Oh, I love it. Excellent. Ashley, this has been great. How can people learn more? Where can they get in touch with you?
Yes, well, LinkedIn is probably the easiest thing. Ashley Welch at Somersault Innovation being the company, or you can email me, Ashley at somersaultinnovation.com. Check your spelling of somersault, 1M. And I'm sure they can find me through you as well.
Absolutely. We now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get show highlights, beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes. You can scan the QR code on screen, or you can visit us at SalesTV.live /newsletter. This has been another edition of Sales TV Live. On behalf of everyone at Sales TV, to our guests and to our audience, thank you very much for being an active part in today's conversation.